Welcome back to Digging into the Bible, and we're taking a look at Genesis chapter 5 this time. We're looking at the descendants of Adam all the way through Noah. And this is one of those sections of scripture where, probably if there's going to be those parts where we look at it and go, what do I do with this? This is one of those things. But it's also the type of passage that perhaps, or this chapter is perhaps one that causes some stumbling or some questions. And your kids may have some interesting questions as they dig into it and they kind of go, what is happening here? So we'll read through this quickly and then I'll offer some comments. Starting at verse 1, this is the book of the generations of Adam. When God created man, he made him in the likeness of God. That's nice. We're coming back to that, this is Moses reminding us that how did God create? It's only been a couple of chapters, but there's a reinforcement that despite the sin, despite the issues, God created us to be in his image. Okay. And he's preserving that. Is it damaged? Yes, absolutely. But God is preserving that image. Male and female, he created them and he blessed them and named them man when they were created. When Adam had lived 130 years, he fathered a son in his own likeness and after his image and named him Seth. So that gives you a time frame from creation and Adam and his time with Eve and the birth of Seth. So there's 130 years going on here. The days of Adam after he fathered Seth were 800 years, and he had other sons and daughters. We don't know how many. Over that time period, one could imagine many, and very many, perhaps. Thus, all the days of that Adam lived were 930 years, and he died. This is the fun part. It's just very matter of fact stuff. Well, he lived, he had a bunch of kids, and he died. When Seth had lived 105 years, he fathered Enosh. Again, I can't imagine being that age and fathering kids. I'm just shy of 50 right now, and I don't know that I would go back and have another kid now. Um, but we'll maybe explore what might have been different at that time. But we'll take a look at this. Seth lived after he had fathered Enosh 807 years and had other sons and daughters. Notice a pattern again. Thus, all the days of Seth were 912 years, and he died. When Enosh had lived 90 years, he fathered Kenan. Enosh lived after he fathered Kenan 815 years, and he had other sons and daughters. Thus, all the days of Enosh were 905 years, and he died. When Kenan had lived 70 years, he fathered Mahalalel. Kenan lived after he fathered Mahalalel 840 years, and he had other sons and daughters. And this continues. I'm just for brevity, I'm not going to read through all of these, but you're noticing a trend. You have a chunk of time, from our perspective, an unusually long chunk of time before they have a kid. Here's a kid. Now, what's interesting, we're following a generation. Is that the first generation? Well, Seth was not the first generation of Adam. I don't know that we're necessarily going to have to say that these are the first generation of each of these, but this is the generations or the line through which we are charting our course in biblical history. So it charts its way through. You get interesting, verse 21, references to Enoch. When Enoch had lived 65 years, he fathered Methuselah. Enoch walked with God after he fathered Methuselah 300 years and had other sons and daughters. Thus, all the days of Enoch were 365 years. Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. Well, that was really vague and kind of out of nowhere. Apparently, Enoch was godly enough. He walked with God to such an extent that he didn't see death. That when it was time for him to go, 365 years into his life, God said, I'm taking you to be with me. And I'm doing it directly. I'm not going to have you go through death. And so in some form, God simply removes him from this life and takes him to the next life. Imagine being that godly, that you're that close to God that he says, I'm going to withhold my punishment of death because of sin, because of how well you have followed me. When Methuselah had lived 187 years, he fathered Lamech. Methuselah lived after he fathered Lamech 782 years, and he had other sons and daughters. Thus, all the days of Methuselah were 969 years, and he died. We often talk about Methuselah being the oldest person the person to have lived the longest. Scripturally, that's true in the sense that his is the longest lifespan listed. I can't imagine living nearly 1,000 years, but apparently that was what was going on. And in a moment, we'll talk about that a little bit here. Now, is he necessarily the longest lived? He probably is. But at the same time, are there other generations? Are there other people out there that are not noted? Uh, yeah, there's plenty of them. This is one line that we're going through. Are there others that lived a similar age range? Yeah, perhaps. We don't know. We get a little further down, we get through Lamech. He only lives 777 years. And then we get the last part of this chapter. After Noah was 500 years old, Noah fathered Shem, Ham, and Japheth. So he's 500 years old and he has 3 boys. Again, do we know if these are the only kids he has? Perhaps when we get into the next chapter, it may appear that those are the last that are with him, at least, if they're not the only ones that he had. Again, can't be definitive on this because scripture doesn't speak particular to this. So here's a thing that may come up in conversation, and maybe the kind of a thing that you puzzle with and your kids are probably wrestling with. How on earth do these guys live this long? Well, we can't know 100%, but we can speculate a little bit and we can say, was the climate of the earth different? And allowing for, so pre-flood, we're going to get into the flood shortly, but pre-flood, is the climate of the earth different that allowed for longer lifespans? Perhaps there are theories that explore this possibility. Had sin taken such effect yet that there was a larger level of corruption on the earth that perhaps grew over time and caused eventually lifespans to shorten and shorten? Yeah, that may have been a reason where that hadn't happened yet. So there were many of the diseases that would crop up and cause lifespans to shorten hadn't had the time to develop yet. And so perhaps that may have been a reason. Or perhaps God is allowing, especially perhaps with a line like this, where this is a godly line, this is those that follow him. You could also wonder whether God is in some way allowing and extending their lifespans in order to establish a strength in the foundations of the society that they would build. And perhaps that's a little bit of what's going on. In the end, these are all bit of speculation. These are all possibilities. Can we say definitively how this necessarily happened from scripture? I can't. I can't offer exactly what that looks like. There are those that would like to argue around this and say, well, were these literal years? Did the people not understand what a year was? The calculation of a year might have been a little bit off here and there, but I don't think they were confused about what a year looks like. I mean, people have pretty much understood for quite some time. And the point at which they were writing this down, they were maintaining their culture orally that becomes eventually this written form that Moses captures. Moses is also being guided by God in the writing of this. So the likelihood that God is confused or Moses is confused or the oral tradition is confused it seems unlikely. But that in fact, in some form, yes, God did allow for lengthier lives early on. Perhaps those are those great questions that we get to ask God in heaven to say, explain to me how and why this all happened. I mean, I'm curious to know. But at this point, we take by faith, even though we don't fully understand, and say, during that time, there was some necessity for this. But then moving forward, after the flood and as we get further along, that necessity goes away, whatever in particular that was. Okay? We will jump into, and I love the title, the kind of chapter 6, increasing corruption on earth. Boy, we got stuff to look forward to, don't we? So God bless, and I will see you next week.